You're listening to Kizuki, the podcast. I'm Mae Yoshikawa, and I define the Japanese concept of Kizuki as the following. Kizuki 1. A moment of epiphany, an aha of realization or insight which opens the knower to a new dimension of truth that was formerly unknown. 2. Steps in an incremental growth of awareness, resulting in a movement from ignorance to greater awareness of the bigger picture. A kind of knowing that cannot be undone, that cannot be unrealized. As a longtime yoga and meditation practitioner, a world traveler, and curious self-explorer, I'm obsessed with Kizukis. Listen on each week for inspiring and enlightening stories that may just tip you over for your next aha. On this week's episode, 100 episodes, one conversation. Welcome, everyone. This is my 100th episode. 100 times choosing to sit down, turn on the mic, and share a realization. 100 moments of awareness. 100 little acts of becoming. And today, you are in for a special treat because for this episode, I'm not just sharing my own Kizuki and reflections. I invited 2 listeners to send me voice memos, 1 comment and 1 question, and I am going to respond to them here in real time. You know, it just reminds me that really we together are part of a bigger conversation. Because when I started this podcast, I thought I was just pressing record and speaking into space, hoping it will reach someone. But over time, it's you who's made me realize something deeper, that every episode has been a part of a dialogue between you and me. Between your life and Kizuki's and mine. Between that Kizuki or insight and what we choose to do with it. Because Kizuki isn't just the seeing. Kizuki leads us to choice, then integration or embodiment, and eventually connection. Like this. And if we've made it to 100 episodes together, I know it means that something has been integrating, not just for me, but for us. So today, I want to honor that and celebrate it with you. Let's begin.
Hi, May. So yeah, just like reflecting on your last episode, I felt it in my core when you said you realized that you had this feeling of, okay, I'm waiting for the perfect opportunity to carry me in the direction I want to go in, and feeling like depending on someone else for that opportunity. I've felt that way before, definitely. I didn't feel like truly happy, which was weird because I understand from an outside perspective, it seems like, okay, like I'm doing well, but in reality, I was feeling very unhappy, and there were days where I was really depressed. I've almost felt numb. I felt like I had a routine in place, but I wasn't happy in it. Like I felt that I was just like operating like a robot, but I wasn't really living. And when I thought about my future, I was like, oh, well, I guess this is going to be my life now. I just work in corporate America and maybe start a family, and then that's going to be my life and that's it. The idea of that just is not exciting to me. Like I feel like I just have so much more that I can do and offer. I think it also didn't help to have family members, especially my parents, who always kind of downplay the possibility of music becoming like a career for me. But anyways, I think this year I've gotten a lot better, and I'm recovering from the depression I was going through in the past year, and I feel much better now, but it's still hard. Sometimes I feel like I did choose the path to go into healthcare to make my parents happy, to be honest with you. Um, I'm not saying I don't care for it, but it's just not really me because I don't feel like I'm able to fully be myself. And I think what you meant about waiting for that right opportunity, I don't think, I could continue singing in my bedroom or my living room, but that's not going to get me closer to what my goals and dreams are. I have to put myself out there, and there's a part of me, I think, because of the external voices I heard from my family and from even some friends I went to school with, that made me feel like second guess myself, like, oh, who am I to think I can do this? I'm not 19 anymore. Why am I pursuing this? Um, but I don't think it's too late. I don't think those external voices are right. Just because they couldn't do it doesn't mean that you can't. And so, yeah, I just feel like this year I am taking more like active steps to get towards where I want to be in my life and career. So, yeah, I just wanted to share that, how I related to your last podcast.
Gosh, thank you for your honesty and your share. I believe that was episode 98 that you were talking about. And I want to pick up right where you left off because you said something that really caught my attention at the tail end there. You said, I'm taking more active steps to get toward where I want to be in my life and in my career. As I listened to that phrase, something rose up in me because I know that I've had these thoughts about my own life. And what if the real question isn't about where you want to go? What if the real question is, who are you being while you're getting there? Because as I unleashed in that episode back in episode 98, I definitely have that tension in myself about getting where I want to be, or maybe even about placement or job titles, industries, corporate versus music, healthcare versus artistry. But truly, the deeper tension isn't just the role or the job, it's about our identity. It's about who am I allowed to be? And you really bravely described something that so many people experience but rarely admit. Because from the outside, it looked like you were doing well. But inside, in truth, you felt numb, depressed, like you were operating on autopilot. You had a routine, but you weren't really living. And I just want to say there's absolutely nothing weird about that. In fact, it's a misconception to think that you can thrive in a life that was chosen for you by someone else on someone else's map, even though it might have been your parents who've known you since birth. I truly believe this, not just for myself, but also for my kids too, that every soul is individual and sovereign, and only yourself. You're the only person who knows, who has that inner compass that guides you to where your heart is pointed. And there's just no way that someone else can tell you what excites you most. And that's the thing about our parents, right? They usually hand us the safest blueprint they know because for sure they don't want risk and danger for us. Even if it's not physical or emotional danger, just the risks of cutting it out in this life. And that blueprint comes from love, their version of love. But it's also kind of laced with their version of fear and survival, too. That is, from their own limitations. And that's the crazy thing about just evolution, because each generation is not just born to carry on the lineage, we're also born to update the operating system that used to be our parents, right? So, of course, living under those limitations within those bounds of quote unquote safety doesn't feel like the same thing as aliveness for you personally, because that's not what it was about to begin with. When you said, I guess this is going to be my life now, and I could feel that heaviness in your voice, I want you to know, and let's just reiterate it for the record for all of us, that was not failure. Not on your part or on any of us when we come to any point in our life where we think, oh, I might have messed this up. Because in fact, that was information. And from that information, you're having your moment of Kizuki, a moment when something inside you says, this isn't it. This doesn't fit. And God, that's a hard reckoning, especially at first. That first realization is harsh and uncomfortable. But I want to remind us that it's sacred. And then comes the second part, equally as important, which is choice. It's often not a dramatic leap. It's not about quitting everything you do tomorrow, but the internal decisive moment where you choose, do I continue living from the version of me that's just trying to make everyone else comfortable? Or do I begin to choose myself and live from the version of me that feels truer to me? And so you kind of bounced off of my episode and you said that you know what it feels like to be waiting for the perfect opportunity, for someone or something to carry you in the direction you want to go. So many of us do that, right? We think when the right mentor appears, or when someone discovers me, or when I get permission, or when I feel fully confident, then I'll move. But the amazing thing is that I don't hear you doing that. I hear you beginning to quietly claim yourself. You said, singing in my bedroom isn't going to get me closer to my dreams. I have to put myself out there. And it's true. From that choice, you choose to embody what you believe in. And that must inevitably lead to an action that reflects those values about you. Okay, this really feels like talking to my sister because I see so much of myself in you. I just want to touch upon a deeper layer there that coexists. Because this is so true to myself too. And the delicate question here is, because it is about who you are being, more so than where you're bound to arrive at, right? Because who knows where we're going to arrive. But in the meantime, who are you being? And these experiences, who are they molding you to become? So here's a question. Are you willing to be that singer before anyone validates you as one? Because a singer who sings privately is still a singer. And a singer who claims herself publicly, even if it was imperfect, somehow becomes more integrated because you're owning that authorship of your choice. And that brings us to the third step in the arc, from Kizuki to choice, then to integration, or that embodiment of who you're being. And that's really when the insight moves from your aha moment into your body and your nervous system and your actions. And that's how you show yourself that's who you are. I think for me, that's when also you begin to notice that your internal self-talk shifts from who am I to think I can do this to who am I if I don't take action on this? And I love that you mentioned your age. Like, I'm not 19 anymore because that voice is like borrowed from some representation of collective culture that's so focused, like weirdly overly obsessed with younger is better or some form of comparison or scarcity, like time is running out. And it's basically based on a fear of embarrassment or maybe even slight protective energy, like, what if I don't make it? And God, don't we all know that those fears are real? But the truth is that dreams do not expire. They might change, they might morph into different forms and expressions, but dreams do not. And I want to plug in here because my art and my favorite artistry, if you could say, is writing, right? And my writing mentor taught me this, that if you have the ache, you have what it takes. And I live by that. So I hope that's encouragement for you too. And it's a good time to remind us all that integration means that you incorporate these voices of fear and this self-breaking system because it's only there to try to protect you, right? It isn't about erasing your fears and overcoming them and dissipating them forever. I feel like it's more like, you let them be there. You let the fears come. You just don't let them drive your life. Which is why I find that this other thing that you said was so powerful and bold because you admitted to yourself, I almost feel like I chose healthcare to make my parents happy. And that awareness, that admittance is powerful. And I just want to say that there's nothing shameful about that. Because every cell in your body is your guiding light, right? It's going to guide you to what feels right for you in your gut. And I just don't want you to let anyone shame you about that. In that sense, and I know this from personal experience too, depression is sometimes grief, like grief for the unlived self. Numbness acts like a protective blanket that keeps you by suppressing this pain of not being able to unleash who you are. In other words, your body wasn't betraying you. Your depression, it was informing you like some internal quiet alarm system that, hey, something is off, notice please, And it acts like your cue so that when you take heed, you begin to take small steps, even the smallest of steps toward change, to shift and tweak your choices and your actions towards some version of you that feels more true to you. And that's embodiment. I guess it kind of works like this. You simply begin by asking, who do I want to be today? Who do I want to be? Or how do I want to sing? Even when no one is clapping. So it's like, it's purely about what you do for your joy. It's not about the reward or the results anymore. And that's a hard one, I know, because it's almost like we're trained and conditioned that the meaning of success and that the purpose of life is to achieve these goals. But in truth, we all know that the joy is in the journey. I guess that brings us to the final arc of the Kizuki and the choice, and then the integration and embodiment. because the sharing of that and the voicing of that leads us to connection. Because you know what, dear listener? Someone right now is listening in the middle of corporate America, or perhaps in a marriage, or a life that looks fine on paper. And maybe someone out there feels numb, just like you used to. And your honesty, your share, bridges that isolation. Maybe that's what this 100th episode is about. Sometimes it's not a dramatic answer, but it is about our journey. Dare I say, it's our sacred journey. 100 moments of choosing to be more yourself. So thank you for reminding all of us. There's nothing wrong with you for wanting more aliveness, for being called to more. There's nothing wrong with you for outgrowing an old map, even if it, at least for now, disagrees with what your parents wanted. And you know what? At the end of the day, there is nothing selfish about becoming yourself, because this is your life.
Hey there, my name's Julian. The first episode that I heard was The Boyfriend Who Cried, and that really resonated with me because I've always, lived by the notion that relationships are fluid, is sort of the terminology I use. So first and foremost, thank you for what you do and for doing this. My question is this. I've had a really difficult time through my life. Let me rephrase. I've had a very reluctant attitude toward cutting ties with people or stepping away where other people might step away from a relationship. I think this is most prominent in romantic relationships, although I've also had it in platonic relationships. I guess the evidence is that I'm still, close friends with basically all of my exes. And 90% of the time, it's been a beautiful thing, and I'm grateful to maintain those friendships and see them evolve the way they do. But then there's the 10% of time where I have feelings still stewing, where I feel like there's unresolved business, and I wish I could create some mental separation. It's just really difficult considering how much history I've had with somebody and how much I care about them and inevitably will continue to care. So I was wondering in what situations you found it appropriate to encourage that distance actively within yourself rather than sort of letting your feelings dull out with time as gradual as they may come. I feel like sometimes I string out the process by remaining close to somebody in some capacity rather than going no contact, for example, or otherwise forcing a disconnect so that my feelings can sort of proceed. So I appreciate your time and your thoughts and would be interested to hear your take on it.
Hi, Julian. Thank you for this. I love the way you framed it, like relationships as fluid. And that already tells me something about how you move through the world. I hear this generosity and gentleness in you. And the fact that you can remain friends with all your exes, that speaks to a lot of emotional maturity. And it speaks to the level of care you have for your relationships. And I'm hearing a different angle being hinted at beneath the question that you actually asked. Because your question right at the tail end there was, I was wondering in what situations you found it appropriate to encourage that distance actively within yourself rather than letting your feelings dole out with time. And what I heard in that question was you not asking Is it okay to stay connected, or do I need distance? You're effectively, without saying it, what you're actually asking, probing at, is when does choosing to stay connected become self-abandonment? Because you said there's the 90% that's beautiful, and then there's the 10% where something else is stewing. And what I'm sensing here is that it's this 10% that's asking for your attention, because it feels like unresolved energy. Something about your feelings in that 10% that haven't fully had an opportunity to be metabolized. And your system in this discomfort is kind of like knocking at your door saying, hey, notice me, notice me. And your awareness is going, maybe this proximity that I'm in a habit of choosing might be delaying my process for me. Okay. And because you do have a point, I think a lot of times it's portrayed like it's the emotionally mature, maybe even right thing to hang around and remain friends. But sometimes, like you're noticing and feeling, staying can be a way to dodge the grief of truly letting go, at least for a while. And it depends for different people at different times, but staying can also sometimes be a way to make it look like breaking up was okay when it didn't really feel okay at all in rawness. But of course, in your head, you know that eventually it'll be okay, like breaking up will be okay. And that's true too. But my point is that before you get to that okayness, there are some feelings to be felt, whether it's anger or sadness or grief or remorse or rage even. But a lot of these feelings, I feel like in our modern life, they're almost considered these negative, ugly feelings that aren't supposed to be felt. And I can tell you, in all my years of practicing myself and also teaching meditation and mindfulness and these kinds of awareness practices, these feelings of loss, grief, breaking up, the pain, these are all the feelings that humans just naturally gravitate away from because we're so fearful of feeling them. But like you said, this remaining 10%, it's like without feeling them, without actually going through those emotions, there isn't a way of being whole, because it's like you're denying this important aspect of yourself. Of all of us, we all have quote unquote negative feelings, right? It's just a part of being human. So you mentioned about this reluctance to cut ties. And the first thing that popped into mind for me was, I want to ask you, what are you making it mean about yourself if you cut those ties? And we all have different answers to that. But the truth is that distance isn't necessarily punishment. It's not necessarily wrong. It's not even necessarily immaturity. And it's not always drama. Sometimes distance can be just the right medicine. And the tricky thing and the beautiful thing about your question, Julian, is that this isn't about, should I cut them off? I feel like your true question is, how can I be fully myself Or can I be fully myself and remain in this connection right now? And if there's any inkling of a no in that answer, if a part of you is still hoping or still somewhat attached, or maybe there's a part of you that needs to grieve, that needs to be apart, and it's being quietly shoved down, then in those cases, the closeness that you're choosing may be signaling something else. And I want to say this as gently as possible, because in those cases, there's a little bit of self-betrayal on your part. And if there's any little bit of self-betrayal in the mix, like you said, there's a stringing out of the process that could have been a lot simpler. Because there are seasons in relationships, right? They're not always all great and rosy. I mean, some seasons are for closeness, some are for integration, some are for silence, some are for growth. But in my opinion, all, whether near or far, are for learning, for feeling, and for becoming more whole, for integrating the spectrum of different feelings and emotions that you, gentle soul, as a human being, gets to feel. Sometimes our kindness gets in our own way. Like, maybe you make yourself emotionally available even with people you've recently broken up with, potentially like against what's best for you. And to that, I have the perfect question. Because I once heard, this is many, many years ago when I was studying yoga and meditation. Someone shared with me the quote, "Would you rather be right or happy?" And that was such a kaboom in my face, because at the time I was so adamant about me being right that I didn't realize or couldn't realize that my clinging to being right was getting in my own way of just being happy. And so along the same lines, I might ask you this. If you had to choose, total ultimatum, would you rather your relationships be pretty or real? And that might be where I would sort of draw a line in the sand. I mean, it's not definitive or absolute by any means, but and it's because it's not definitive and final. It's not like you have to go no contact as a rule to give yourself peace of mind. No, it's not like that. But if you sense that your nervous system feels activated under your skin, unfinished, or slightly tangled, you get to give yourself time and space to prioritize yourself and to tend to that. There is no shame in that. There is no loss in that. And that is actually wise for your system. And guess what? That is real. And real always feels like coming home to yourself. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for both you and the other person is to step back just long enough to come back whole. Thank you for listening, for reflecting, for growing with me. This was my 100th episode, and it was so meaningful because together we shared 100 small moments of choosing awareness, choosing yourself, choosing a little opening that just might bring change in your mind and in your life. If this space has meant something to you, would you please celebrate it with me? Share an episode with a friend, or maybe leave a rating if you haven't yet. I would love to hear from you. And if you haven't already, please make sure to sign up for my newsletter at the bottom of maey.live. It's a weekly newsletter where you'll receive regular Kizuki prompts, as well as announcements for possible opportunities like this, where you might be able to ask me a question and have your voice featured on a future podcast one day. Again, thank you for being here and for sharing this space with me.